Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which started on the 26th of February, has completed 6 months, and there are still no signs of de-escalation. According to the United Nations, the war has displaced more than 8 million people, with more than 6.5 million people crossing over into neighboring countries. More than 5,500 civilians have been killed and close to 8,000 have been injured, though the true total is expected to be much higher. Ukrainian military claims the invasion has seen some 9,000 Ukrainian troops killed since the conflict began. According to a study from Kyiv School of Economics, the war has caused over $108 billion in damage to Ukraine's infrastructure and around $600 billion in overall damage to the economy. Ukraine has claimed that Russian missile strikes have targeted and destroyed tons of Ukrainian infrastructure, including railways, apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, and shopping malls. Both the US and Ukraine's European allies have offered billions of dollars in aid and weaponry support to the country since the war began. US has provided about $10.6 billion so far in military aid. Not just that, the NATO allies have also attempted to isolate Russia with a united, coordinated package of sanctions, including banning Russian oil and gas imports. But despite the economic impact, Russia remains determined in its adventure and continues to step up its offensive. Russian President Putin has ordered the Russian military to increase its troop deployment in Ukraine. So what's the road ahead really? Joining us now to discuss this further is strategic affairs expert Brahma, professor at the Center for Policy Research, and Ukrainian MP Oleksiy Goncharenko. Brahma, let me begin by asking you, when the war began, Russia called it a special operation, limited to Lugansk and the Donetsk region. They also vowed to take over Kyiv within a matter of days. They have not been able to take control of Ukraine the way they wanted to, or fulfill the claims made initially. Where do we stand in the war as of now, and how do you think this is going to progress in the months to come?
When we think of a war, we think of a victor and a loser. But in this war, there will be no victor, there will be only losers. And the losers will include the Western camp. The West set out to achieve two goals: a resounding defeat of Russia on the battlefield and undermining the Russian economy through unprecedented sanctions. Both those goals today look really distant. So for all sides, for Ukraine in particular, which is suffering devastating destruction, but even for Russia, the costs have been immense. For all sides, this war is going to be a lose-lose proposition. And I think the longer this war continues, the greater the devastation in Ukraine, and also the greater will be the costs for the West. We talk only about the costs of Ukraine, the costs of Russia, but the West, Europe in particular, is also paying significant costs. And most importantly, let's not forget that this war has spawned a global energy crisis and a global food crisis. So this war is unique in the sense that it impacts the entire world.
Right. Important points there. Oleksiy Goncharenko, let me ask you, do you feel that we are at a decisive moment as far as this war is concerned? Does Ukraine expect support from the West, which can actually help turn this war once and for all and repel the Russian attack? Do you think that can happen?
Hello. First of all, I want to react to what I've heard with Mr. Chellaney. Not the war is causing the energy crisis, food crisis, but who started this war? Russia started this war, so Russia is the author of all these crises. Speaking about loss, there's certainly every war is loss. There is no normal person in the world who can think that war can benefit to somebody except Putin. He is an insane person. He can think so, but for every other people, it's clear that who lost this war. Russia already lost this war. I just want to remind you that Putin was telling that they will take Kiev in 3 days. Now it's the 7th month of the war, and they don't have any chance to take Kiev. And all of their emphasis is now in the southern and eastern part of Ukraine. And during last month and a half, they don't have any territorial gains. So the Russia is definitely losing this war. But how much time will it take for them to finally understand it, to retreat from the territory of Ukraine? That is the question. Answering your question about Western support, yes, we are very thankful for all support we are receiving, and this support is becoming bigger and bigger. And speaking from a military point of view, Ukrainian army today is stronger than it was on February 24. And Russian army today is much weaker because our weaponry we are receiving from the West, we're receiving more and more the most modern and sophisticated weaponry. And Russia is losing all the best weapons they have. And they don't have any allies who will help them. The only countries which supported Russia in the United Nations were Northern Korea, Sudan, Venezuela, and Eritrea. That's all. That's all of their, and Syria. That's all of their allies on the planet.
Right. Let me get in Brahma Chellaney once again. Brahma Chellaney, do you think Russia will walk away from this war? What kind of a face saver would they be looking at? Because the Western support is not going to stop. That is only going to increase further. Do you think at some point Putin is going to pull back? And what could possibly lead to that?
Well, let's be clear. First, Russia today controls at least 1/5 of Ukraine. 1/5 of Ukraine is under Russian occupation. It's unlikely that Russia will retreat from Ukraine. The war gains it has made, it will seek largely to retain. And the unprecedented Western sanctions thus far have failed to make a dent on the Russian military strategy. Russia has not only withstood the brunt of the Western sanctions, but also is determined to stay put in Ukraine and to consolidate its territorial gains. The time has come for all sides to negotiate a ceasefire by launching serious peace talks, or else there'll be more devastation, more killings, and the global energy and food crises will escalate with devastating consequences for the poorer countries. We have seen Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is just one example of how the poorer countries are bearing the brunt of the global energy and food crisis that this war has triggered. And then there are these larger issues. For example, as the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair has pointed out, the world today is at a turning point in history. And the Ukraine war shows that the West's dominance is coming to an end. Unfortunately, this wholly punitive approach that the West has adopted toward Russia is only strengthening Putin's grip on power at home and driving Russia and China closer together. A Russia-China strategic axis is something that works against Western interests, especially American interests. So for American policy to drive Russia and China closer together is actually undermining America's own long-term interests.
Right. Oleksiy, Goncharenko, let me get you in at this point. How badly has the Ukrainian economy been hit over the last 6 months? And from a Ukrainian point of view, the Russian goals have not been achieved. But what kind of a compromise or what kind of a solution would be all right to the Ukrainian political setup, the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian government? Are they still sticking to the fact that Russia must retreat completely before any negotiations would be successful?
Speaking about economy, certainly Ukrainian economy is suffering badly. It's hard to predict, but we will lose till the end of the year probably near 1/3 of our economy. That is estimations, and definitely that is very difficult. Speaking about what is acceptable and not acceptable for us. When I hear about negotiations, Ukraine is ready for negotiations today, but about what? Negotiations about concession of our territories? No, we will never go to these negotiations. We're not interested in these negotiations. We can't leave our people. We can't leave millions of Ukrainians under occupation because Russia is committing genocide against them, killing, raping, destroying everything on the occupied territories. We can't do this. If to speak about when Russia will retreat, at least to the positions on February 24, we're ready to speak about it today. No problems about to speak about it. But speaking about, I'm on Indian channel, and I want to address to Indian viewers and ask them, do they think that international order should work? Do they think that international law should work? All bigger country, big and aggressive country can attack its neighbor and take whatever it wants. Because if Putin would be successful in any way, if Ukraine would agree for any territorial concessions, it will mean that this is the way to change borders, to solve the conflicts. It's just to attack and to destroy and to kill. That will be a very bad example for the whole planet, and the results will fill people throughout the whole planet. So I'm sure that in interest of any person on the planet is that international law should be restored. And international law is Ukrainian territory in its boundaries, which we have and which we are accepted by Russia. It's not a boundaries which Russia was not accepting. We have a number of documents and treaties with Russia where they acknowledged our territory, that it is Ukraine. And now they just want to, because they feel that they want to do it. But fortunately for the whole world, they can't.
Right, right. Important points there. Let me go back to Brahma, Chellaney. Brahma, Chellaney, just yesterday we saw India for the first time voting against Russia at a UNSC vote. This was procedural. This was in the context of Volodymyr Zelensky addressing the UNSC. Russia had, of course, voted against the proposal. How do you see India's stance there? Do you think we should not be reading too much about the stand that India took in this case?
Well, much of the world has taken a neutral stance. If you look at all the major non-Western democracies, and India is only one of them, all of them have chosen the path of neutrality. But there are larger issues that are weighing on the minds of policymakers in the developing world in particular, but in the non-Western world as a whole. The US military aid to Ukraine averages more than $160 million a day. It dwarfs annual US aid to any other country, including Afghanistan at the height of the US war there. And just a couple of days ago, President Biden announced almost $3 billion in additional American military aid to Ukraine. The question is, will this be an endless war? Because the Americans are sinking more and more military aid into Ukraine. The Russians seem determined to consolidate their war gains. And the consequences of this war are being felt across the world. So given those realities and given the impacts on the poorer countries, the time has come for international diplomacy to begin looking for ways to end this war. Because at the moment, the West, Ukraine, and Russia seem determined to continue the war. So it's time for the rest of the world to intervene and find a path toward peace.
Right. Thank you very much for joining us, Brahma, Chellaney, and Oleksiy, Goncharenko. We're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. A special discussion coming up with Nelson Cunningham of McClarty Associates and Amber Phillips of Washington Post on the US midterm elections when we're back.